Here's part 3, Inter-Familial Sexual Abuse, background briefing.
I think it was very wrong, and for him to write me a letter with all them is just absolutely disgusting and has actually given me nightmares.
Larissa says she doesn't believe Cedar Cottage, with its focus on first-time offenders, was right for her family.
After we broke up, one of our mutual friend's son had actually come forward and disclosed that he had molested him. At that stage, the child was young. The police decided there wasn't enough evidence to charge, and he was interviewed but let go. I rang docs, I rang sexual health, I rang a whole heap of people after I found out and said, you know, I'm concerned. I've got 4 young children that are supposed to have access with this person. Should I stop access and let him take me to court? And all of the advice I got was, no, nothing's proven. If he did take you to court, court would grant him access to them anyway.
In many cases, the legal system is failing to protect children from interfamilial abuse, says one of the country's leading child protection experts. Professor Frida Briggs says it also doesn't give mothers a fair hearing.
Women's legal services, to my certain knowledge, advise mothers now not to tell the family court about either domestic violence or the fact that their children have been sexually abused because of the risk that they will lose them, having been labelled as mentally ill, and usually not by a psychiatrist. I have literally hundreds of parents who've written to me, and they are devastated because they lost their children just because they reported child sexual abuse in the family court and were labelled as mad or bad.
The perpetrators know that if they plead not guilty, there's a good chance they'll get off.
Lawyers encourage them to do it. When I was doing research with child sex offenders in jails, some told me that they wanted to plead guilty and their lawyers tried to persuade them to plead not guilty because it's so easy to trick children. You know, they expect young victims to be able to remember dates, times, places, and maybe they've been sexually abused many times, sometimes by more than one person. So the aim of the lawyer is to discredit the child.
The Cedar Cottage program aimed to avoid this scenario by requiring interfamilial offenders to plead guilty in return for being treated in the community. Frances says if it weren't for Cedar Cottage, her ex John, who ended up pleading guilty to multiple charges, might not have been convicted at all.
There was support at that starting point from certain close people to him who actually suggested he plead not guilty. I know he was contemplating doing that.
Clementine, Frances and John are slowly rebuilding some trust, although Frances makes sure she's always present. The 3 still voluntarily participate in Cedar Cottage group counselling sessions. Frances says the news that Cedar Cottage will close caused Clementine distress.
My daughter said to me, you know, well, what am I supposed to do? I thought I was doing something right. You know, I felt like saying, yeah, you were doing the right thing. You know, and she just said, well, why are they doing that for? I'm like, because they focus on the crime and not the behavioural change.
Even if they're jailed, most child sex offenders will eventually have to be released. Behavioural change is crucial. Do you think there's a risk of you reoffending around children who are not your daughter?
The fact that I was able to sexually abuse my daughter, I think that implies that there is an inherent risk that, you know, I'm capable of sexually abusing children.
How much do you worry that you might reoffend?
Not a lot, because I know I have everything in my routine is, you know, is planned for, and I have standards in place for. You know, I'm usually in situations where there's at least one person who is aware of my abusive past.
In one state, Western Australia, there's now a US-style online sex offender registry for released child sex offenders. It's a popular measure, but it's only for serious repeat offenders, and many interfamilial child sexual abusers aren't even charged, let alone convicted. Critics of the register say it'll perpetuate the myth that most child sexual abusers are deviant strangers instead of within the home. Community reluctance to confront interfamilial child sexual abuse means that some victims, like Frances, are even blamed for what happens.
I mean, I've had people tell me that, obviously, you're a bad mum. And, obviously, just inklings of, well, you didn't do it from sexually, did you? Kind of things. And so it's very stereotypical response, where the blame is on the woman.
People said that to you?
Yeah, absolutely. Family did, actually.
None of the victims in this background briefing will have their stories heard by the Royal Commission. They've been left with a much harder route to justice. If we're not comfortable facing the reality of interfamilial child sexual abuse, we're also guilty of failing its victims and leaving it up to them to escape. At the end of her interview, 15-year-old Taylor had one more thing she wanted to say.
If there is anyone out there that is being abused, just make sure you get the help that you need. I'm not promising that there's going to be relief straight away and that it's all just going to magically disappear, but I promise it will get better.
If you need help with any of these issues, call Lifeline on 13 11 14. The names of all the victims and perpetrators in this story have been changed. Background Briefing's coordinating producer is Linda McGuinness. Research by Anna Whitfeld. Technical production by Phil McKellar. The executive producer is Chris Bullock, and I'm Sarah Dingle.
Well, there you go. They did have a system which was in place and was working really well for the people who took part in it. It didn't seem to work well at all if the victim and the family were not attending the therapy sessions or lectures or whatever it was. But the law and order, public image minded politicians who've come to power in New South Wales have cancelled the program, and it was the only one in Australia, which offered some inducement to people charged with child sexual assault to plead guilty and save everybody the cost of going to court, and then put them through a program that had a high rate of success in stopping them from offending again, while, as the lady said, he had to keep going to work and paying the bills. He wasn't sitting on his ass in jail, pumping iron in the gymnasium. I was a bit worried by the idea that the fella who thought he was a success story reckoned that he was unlikely to offend anybody because he had routines in place and there were people who knew that he was an offender. It didn't sound like he was very confident that he learnt that it's a silly idea to fantasise about having sex with children. So, Warbles on a lot to YouTube. Inter-familial sexual abuse. Background Briefing, ABC Radio National. Ciao.